In this Warframe guide, we're gonna look at the best rifles in the game that everybody should look out for in 2024. We're gonna go over how they work, where you get them from, which mods to use on them, and I'm also gonna give you a cheaper budget build alternative for each and every one of them. So, after a huge shout out to all my generous channel members who help me keep the lights on, let's jump right into it. Now, first of all, to even make sense of today's list, I gotta make one thing very clear. Warframe itself technically considers everything a rifle as long as it can fit serration. Assault rifles, LMGs, bows, and even a literal 17th century ship cannon. That's why today, we're only going to feature traditional rifles, carbines, LMGs, all that stuff, and we're going to have rankings on all the other weapon categories here in the future. Of course, all the weapon showcases in this video are without external buffs and anything else, so what you see here is what you get, but that being said now, let's look at our first candidate. Number 1 on the list, and this one probably comes to nobody's surprise, would be the one and only Fenmore. I know, this weapon has pretty much become a meme by now, and if you would go out there and shout into the community that this is the literal best rifle in the game, I'm sure you'd find quite a lot of people who agree to that. The Fenmore is an Incarnon weapon and therefore traditionally features 2 different modes, the normal and the Incarnon mode. In the normal mode, it's a semi-automatic rifle dealing quite decent damage, but in the Incarnon mode that whole thing turns fully automatic and boy does it deal damage! Do you remember the times where we would look at a fully automatic rifle and would be like, oh wow, this has 30 base damage, that is quite a lot? Well, the Fenmore has 140 with an insane fire rate in the Incarnon form, and most of that is being slashed, so you could even build it into a DOT bleed build. Now, since every Incarnon weapon has multiple evolution options where we can pick between different buffs, here is what I would recommend for the Fenmore. For Evolution 2, go for Fire Rate because it not only affects the normal, but also the Incarnon mode, which is nice because if you hold down the trigger for longer, the fire rate of the Fenmore actually goes down, so having a bit more fire rate at base is really decent. For Evolution 3, I personally go for magazine capacity because you don't have to reload it that much while you're transmuting it into Incarnon, and all the other options are not really that useful in my opinion. Evolution 4 is the one where you get more status chance at the cost of reducing your crit chance, because in Evolution 5 we have one of the most overpowered buffs in the entire game. The Fenmore has the option to get a plus 2000% base damage buff if you're not critting. So yeah, no question, you're going to use that and you're going to make sure that your crit chance is as low as possible. In the background right here, I personally play the Fenmore into Toxin, going purely against Corpus, but since the biggest portion of its damage is Slash, you could also very well use it against Armored Grineer, building it into a status-based Slash bleed weapon. In order to get the Fenmore for yourself, you have to first complete the new war quest, then unlock the Zeraman 10-0, be rank 2 with the holdfasts there, and then talk to Cavallero, where you can get the blueprints for all the components and then craft it yourself. Weapon number 2, we have the Amprax. Oh man, I used to love this thing like crazy when I got back into Warframe a couple years ago. The Amprax is a Corpus rifle that shoots out lightnings which also arc over to nearby enemies, so you can deal quite a little bit of AoE damage. With a high crit chance of 32% and a 2.2x multiplier, this is a really nice crit weapon, and with its base damage being pure electricity, you only need to add Toxin mods to get Corrosive, which works very well against Grineer, since we all know Corrosive gets a damage bonus against Ferrite armor, which is like 95% of the whole Grineer roster. This right here will be my full Steel Path Corrosive Grineer build, but there's one thing I want to mention about it, and that is if you use a normal Green Archon shard, that increases the maximum amount of corrosive stacks that you can put onto an enemy to 12. That does not completely reduce the armor of the enemy to 0, but it almost does. What that means is you still get the 75% damage bonus from applying corrosive, but also the enemy has next to no resistance left. So if you play the Amprax against Grineer, then I would recommend to actually take one of these green shards so that you pretty much get the best out of both worlds. In case you want to get the Amprax for yourself, then all you need to do is go over to your client's dojo into the Corpus lab, get the blueprint there, and craft it for yourself. Just like the next weapon on our list, which is also a dojo weapon, but it comes from the Grineer lab, and when we're talking about the Grineer lab, of course we're talking about the Ignis Wraith. If you haven't lived under a rock for the last couple hundred years, then you of course know the Ignis Wraith, and you probably also like it quite a lot. What it is pretty much it's a Flammenwerfer, and what it does is it valves Flammen. That pretty much sums up the whole concept. Now, to be fair, the Ignis Wraith is by far not the strongest weapon on today's list. However, it has one thing that many weapons don't, and that is simply unparalleled convenience. The flames that the Ignis shoots out are just so big that aiming pretty much becomes an option, right? As long as you're looking somewhat in the right direction, the enemy is gonna get hit, so you can pretty much play the mission, hold down left mouse button, and everything dies in front of you. When it comes to building the weapon, I personally would recommend a hybrid build where you go a bit into crit but also a lot into status chance, and also especially with higher level steel path enemies, you want to make sure that you have a faction mod on it because it deals a lot of heat status effects, and as we all know, faction damage mods double dip with damage over time effects, meaning all the burns that you're gonna inflict with it are gonna deal way more damage. And now that we're already speaking about Grineer weapons, the next one on our list is one of my absolute favorite rifles in the entire game, has always been since it came out and still is, and that would be the Kuva Shakur. Now, when it comes to the Kuva Shakur, it is certainly not a coincidence that it almost sounds like one of the most famous West Side rappers of all times, because this thing spits fire. This thing is a very powerful semi-automatic rifle with explosive projectiles, and the nicest thing about it is that not only the direct hit, but also the explosion force procs impact. Now, you might wonder, impact, isn't that pretty much the worst status type in the game? Yes, but there's a mod called Internal Bleeding which can turn impact procs into slash procs. And given the fact that we have a very strong, very crit heavy weapon right here, you can almost imagine that this is going to be devastating wherever you aim it. Since it is a Kuva weapon, to get your hands on it, you will have to kill a Kuva Lich that has this weapon, and when it comes to generating that Kuva Lich, I would personally highly recommend going for a Toxin or a Cold Progenitor, so you only need one more mod to turn it into viral damage, because since we're getting our slashes from the impact procs and therefore not from the status chance directly, having viral on the weapon will not hinder our bleeds, but it will make the enemy even weaker to those bleeds, meaning that would be the ideal choice for the Kuva Shakur. And just by the way, I would be super duper happy if you could maybe spare a like, because it helps out big time with the YouTube algorithm, so cheers so much for your support. But now, let's go on to rifle number 5. Next, we have another Incarnon weapon, which should probably come to nobody's surprise because Incarnon weapons are just incredibly strong weapon types, some of the best in the entire game, and we have here the Burst On Prime Incarnon. To be fair, the normal Burst On and also the Burst On Prime were pretty much really trash guns. However, being just a weak burst rifle in its normal mode, once you switch to Incarnon, oh boy, this thing turns into a rapidly firing heat rifle that also deals a bit of AoE on impact with every single projectile. This thing will just burn away absolutely everything that you aim it at. As you also see in the background right now, you probably have to go into the options and switch off the damage numbers to even see what you're shooting at. Let's quickly look at the Incarnon evolutions. For evolution 2, I used the one with the +2 punch through because the one that gives you multi-shot on the final burst only affects the non-Incarnon version, which, to be fair, you're not really gonna use at any point in time other than charging the Incarnon version back up again. Evolution 3, I went for the weapon recoil because the magazine size doesn't do anything for the Incarnon form, the Incarnon form being just 600 bullets straight up without having to reload. And for Evolution 4, it comes down to personal preference and especially to your loadout, because if you use a primer weapon or you have a companion that can deal a lot of different status types, you might want to go for the direct damage per status type affecting the enemy. However, if you're not really priming, then definitely go for the crit chance one, which all in all is a lot more universal. If this sounds good and you want to get the Burst On Prime Incarnon for yourself, go to the Steel Pass Circuit in Duviri and hope for the best, because the Incarnon adapter will only be dropped from the Duviri Circuit. Once you have that, you can go to Cavallero and turn your Burst On Prime into the Incarnon version. But of course, I want to have some variety on this list and not only talk about the Incarnon weapons, so up next we have another really excellent rifle, and that would be the Exceltra Prime. Being added to the game recently with the Gauss Prime's release, this fully automatic rifle shoots not normal bullets, no, it shoots mini rockets that explode on impact with quite a decent AoE. The only thing you need to take care of is that you don't shoot too close to you, because if the impact is too close to your character model, there will be no explosions at all, so no damage to surrounding enemies. Since the Etc. Prime has a high crit chance and a really good crit multiplier of 3.0, when you're building this weapon, pretty much the ideal build would be going for Hunter Munitions, inflicting slashes through crits, and then going for Viral to make the enemies more vulnerable to those slashes. Just note that, both with the normal Etc. and the Etc. Prime, ammo reserve is a big problem. If you're not careful, or if you're not running any ammo conversion mods or anything, you will run out of bullets very soon. So make sure that you have some sort of ammo economy going on in the background to make sure that you're not running dry. If you want to get your hands on the normal version of the Etc., the blueprints are dropped from the Demolisher units in the mission on Uranus. Up next, we have another Prime rifle, which accompanies probably one of the most popular Warframes in the entire game, Wisp Prime, and that means we're talking about, of course, the Fulmin Prime. The Fulmin Prime is a super versatile weapon, and it features 2 fire modes. Leave the silencer on, and you pretty much have an Arca Plasma-like shotgun projectile that deals a ton of damage, and even though it doesn't look like it, it is classified as fully silent. And then once you take the silencer off, you have a fully automatic rifle. The interesting thing here is that the Fulmin Prime does not have a traditional magazine. It just has an ammo reserve from which it consumes the ammo directly, and if you stop shooting for a second, then it will quickly recharge itself, so you will never have to care about ammo running the Fulmin Prime. In terms of stats, it deals mostly electricity damage, but on the fully automatic version also a little bit of puncture, and on the Big Bada Boom version, you also deal a little bit of impact damage. So really good option right here. If you want a strong and versatile gun, the Fulmin Prime should be very high on your list. Up next, we have one of the best guns in the entire game. I don't want to say the evil word that starts with O and ends with verpowered, so I'm just gonna say it's pretty darn busted. Of course, I'm talking about the Torrid Incarnon. This thing is pretty much as brain dead as it gets, and it is super duper fun to play. See, the normal Torrid is pretty unimpressive. It's a toxin grenade launcher, and that's pretty much it. However, turn it into the Incarnon form, and it will shoot a ray pretty much like the Amprex before that can also spread to nearby enemies. Now, the interesting thing about this is, if you use the mod Firestorm, or even the Prime version, which usually only increases the blast radius of explosive weapons, for the Incarnon form, this also works and makes it that the rays spread to even more enemies, making this thing way stronger. In terms of damage, since it also has an incredibly high crit chance and crit multiplier, what you can do is mod cold onto it so you have pure viral, and then go for Hunter Munitions for a viral slash build. This will be a nightmare for every heavy armored Grineer out there, and you're gonna have a lot of fun doing it. But now, since it is an Incarnon weapon, let's have a quick look at the evolutions. For Evolution 2, simply use the one that gives you 51 base damage. The alternative effects of both don't really affect the Incarnon form, so what you naturally want to go for is the one that gives you more damage. Evolution 3 doesn't really matter at all because it all doesn't affect the Incarnon version. However, I like the magazine capacity, so I don't have to reload as much when I'm charging the Incarnon form. And since it already has a very high base status chance, for the 4th evolution you want to go all out into crit, especially when you're going for the Hunter Munitions bleed build. If you now want to have it for yourself, then just like with the Burst on Prime, you get it from the Steel Path Circuit, you can get the Incarnon adapter, and then turn your normal Torrid into the Incarnon form with Caballero. And just in case you want even more bleed-capable weapons, let's now take a look at the next one, which would be the Tenet Flux Rifle. I don't know about you, but since the normal Flux Rifle is pretty trash, the Tenet version also kind of flew under the radar for me. However, once I actually got to experience it, I am now a huge fan of it and even got myself a ribbon. See, this thing mostly deals slash damage with a pretty decent status chance. That means, naturally, it is gonna be a nice bleed weapon. However, you're gonna be a bit careful when it comes to generating the Sister of Pavos that you actually will get this from, because you want to make sure that not only you have the right progenitor, also you want to make sure your progenitor is pretty low in terms of percentages, because you want to deal mostly slashes with the weapon, meaning you don't want any other element to outshine your slash portion of the damage. In my personal opinion, the nicest progenitor here would be cold, because enemies affected by by cold take more crit damage. All in all, as you also see in the background, the slashes from this thing, especially given the high fire rate, are really insane, drop heavily armored Grineer in no time, and it's just super fun to play in my opinion. Up next, another Incarnon, yay! This time we have the Latron Prime. See, both the normal Latron, the Latron Wraith, and the Latron Prime are pretty unpopular weapons in and of themselves. But since we got our hands on the Incarnon adapter for these, everything changed. In its normal form, the Latron Prime is simply a semi-automatic rifle, and that's it. However, come the Incarnon form, and this thing shoots out big bouncy projectiles of doom that not only have a high crit chance and really good damage, but they even have the capability to full strip enemy armor. Let's look into how this actually works. See, with its 4th evolution, you have the option to go for Flensing Spikes, which removes 20% of the enemy armor per puncture status effect that you're dealing. And since the projectile bounces, what you can do is pull a lot of enemies together in one spot, and then shoot the projectile at the floor in front of them, and then the projectile will bounce between the floor and between their bodies, inflicting a lot of hits, therefore draining a lot of enemy armor. However, if that sounds too finicky for you, then for the 4th evolution I would recommend the Critical Parallel, meaning you just get more crit chance and more crit damage. For evolution 2, I would recommend that, giving you more direct damage per status type affecting the enemy, so tying very much into a priming based playstyle. Or alternatively, if you score a puncture status effect, you get plus 25% multi-shot for 8 seconds, stacks up to 4 times. And evolution 3 pretty much doesn't matter. For the Latron Prime Incarnon, what I personally like is going for a Slash Hunter munition build because we have so much crit and so much damage, so those bleeds really go hard against the enemies. And just like with the other Incarnon weapons on today's list, if you want this one, also have your eyes open for the Steel Path Circuit rotations, go for that and you're gonna have a good time. Okay, up next we have a really special weapon that is also heavily embedded in the Warframe lore, I might say, that being the Godva Prime. See, the Godva Prime is special in many ways. For example, the only reason to get it, as of right now, is having watched last year's TennoCon because it was a reward for watching the stream. Now, on the surface, this is pretty much a very traditional assault rifle, fully automatic, pretty much nothing unseen. However, this one has a 50% chance to deal a flat red crit after applying a status effect. These right here would be the Steel Path and the standard build. However, what I want to talk about before we go on to the next one is a bit about the lore of the actual gun. See, in the Warframe intro, we see an Orokin-era Grineer soldier wielding this weapon. So this raises the question, if we have a Grineer weapon, how can it be that there's actually a Prime version of it, since Prime versions of weapons are only reserved for Tenno weapons? In my opinion, this is actually a really cool feature because it sort of gives us an impression of how the weapon manufacturing might have worked back in the Orokin days when the original Grineer troops were equipped with those things by the Orokin themselves. Just a little food for thought. I'm just gonna stop rambling right now and let's rather go on to the next weapon, which is also super fun. And here we have the Boltor Prime Incarnon. I mean, let's be real, the Boltor is such an iconic weapon in Warframe. I'm sure everybody tried it out after starting the game, and everybody loved nailing enemies to walls. So, naturally, with an Incarnon adapter, this one absolutely belongs on the list. See, while in the normal version, it's a bolt-firing fully automatic assault rifle, with the Incarnon adapter, this one turns pretty much into the Comb Shotgun, which is a fully automatic shotgun type of rifle, which shoots a huge number of pellets. In terms of the evolutions, for the second one, I would recommend Perk 2, because while it at base gives you less damage, with kills you ramp up that damage, even outdoing the first perk, and also with fully automatic weapons, I like ammo efficiency. For evolution 3, nothing really special right here, either go for reload speed or projectile speed, which is also nice so you don't have to pre-aim that much. And for the last evolution, I would personally go the midway and go for both crit chance and status chance at the same time. Now, in contrast to a lot of other Incarnon adapter weapons, for the Boltor it's actually not that straightforward which version of the Boltor you actually want to Incarnon, because we have both the Prime and the Telos variant to pick from, and both are really good options. So which one should you go for? If you like a slash-based damage over time playstyle, then I personally would recommend the Prime because that has more status chance. However, if you prefer to deal more direct damage and you want to kill the enemy right away and not have to wait for the bleed ticks, then in my opinion the Telos version would be the better pick, because that has more crit characteristics at the cost of the status chance, but you know, for direct damage, status chance is not that important anyway. These are the builds that I'm running. Also in the background you see these cause a lot of carnage, so gonna have fun with it. And in terms of acquisition, just like with any other Incarnon Adapter weapon, Steel Path Circuit and then Cavallero. But if you're just sick and tired of all these Incarnon weapons, then don't be, because the next one is a non-Incarnon, non-Prime weapon that is perfectly available to every player out there. Of course, I'm talking about the Trumna. In order to get it, you need to be rank 3 with the Entrati and the Necrolisk, and then you can go to Father and get the blueprints for this gun. At base, it's a slow-firing, fully automatic assault rifle that shoots heavy impact grenades that have a little bit of an AoE. However, by killing enemies, you charge its alt-fire mode, which fires a huge big explosion grenade, dealing tons of damage. Now, the way you want to play the Trumna is, with the normal fully auto fire, you want to apply viral to the enemy, so you gotta build for viral in order to weaken them, and then once you have enough kills to unleash the alternate fire, you shoot that in a big group of enemies and hopefully deal a lot of slashes with a Hunter munition build that you're hopefully gonna use. Because the alt fire this grenade has a huge crit chance, therefore you're probably gonna inflict big time slashes to the enemies that you previously weakened with your normal fire with the viral. But if you don't want to go for damage over time, but just for normal direct damage, I'm pretty sure this one should also work just fine. Now, the next weapon on our list might come as a big surprise for you. At least it was for me, because I completely did not have this one on my radar, but holy moly, it is strong. I'm talking about the Nagantaka Prime. Now, to be fair, at first I wasn't sure if I really want to feature it on this list at all, because technically it's a crossbow and doesn't count as a traditional rifle as I initially said, but with its gameplay style and its characteristics, I thought, well, actually, why not? See, the Nagantaka Prime is a semi-automatic crossbow that shoots bolts from its magazine. In terms of modding, what's really interesting is that the game itself even considers this one not a rifle but actually a bow, because it gets the double fire rate effect that some fire rate mods have for bows. As for how you want to build the weapon, just like many others on the list, this one is very slash heavy, has high base damage, high status chance with a lot of slash damage, therefore this thing can deal absolutely murderous slashes. Those acolytes should really think twice if they want to visit you wielding this baby right here. And last, but definitely, oh boy, definitely not least, we have a weapon that has a very special spot in my heart, that being the Bratton Prime Incarnon. I don't know about you, but I'm sure many of us chose the Bratton as our first weapon when we first got into Warframe. However, to be fair, none of the Bratton family ever had enough power to really sustainably go into Steel Path. That's why I'm so happy that the Bratton was one of the first weapons to receive an Incarnon version, and holy moly, this thing slaps. In its normal version, the Bratton is simply a fully automatic assault rifle. However, in the Incarnon version, it turns to a slower firing assault rifle, dealing pure heat damage on impact, but therefore a lot of it, and also in a quite sizable 3-meter area of effect. Let's quickly look at the evolutions. For evolution 2, it highly depends on whether you have a channeled ability on or not. If yes, then of course go with the one that gives you tons of damage. However, if not, you just go with the other one that has also really nice stats. For Evolution 3, I personally chose the accuracy and recoil one because the other two don't work on the Incarnon mode, and to be fair, the recoil on the Incarnon mode is quite noticeable, so having a bit more stability should really pay off. And for the 4th evolution, it also comes down to your personal preference. If you don't want to go for damage over time and deal direct damage to the enemy as much as possible, then go for the one that gives you full crit chance crit damage. However, if you prefer to play it as a damage over time weapon, then I would go for the crit status hybrid. That should give you the best results in this case. Now, looking at my builds, I made it a little bit different. I just really like to play the Bratton as a single target heavy slashing weapon. And since the biggest portion of its damage on direct hit is slash, I went for a lot of status chance, a faction mod of course for the double dipping, and then as much base damage as I could fit onto it, because that is what makes the bleed value tick up. By the way, if you're not that far into the game just yet, then I also have videos on the best beginner and mid-game weapons right here. Another big shout out to Niels V, Demon Lord Cell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Bland Waffle, Nos Linux Gaming, Lycan Shepherd, Turtle Peer, Shadow Soul, JPT Kochman, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one. Have a nice weekend, and until then, as always, good loot.